The cold metal of the chair bit into Marcus's back as he sat motionless, his eyes locked onto the strange alien devices scattered around him. The walls of the chamber were made of smooth, dark material that shimmered slightly in the dim light, casting eerie reflections. He was surrounded by beings that could only be described as strange, tall, thin creatures with skin that shimmered like liquid metal, their eyes glowing with an unnatural light. Their language was foreign to him, full of clicks and hisses he couldn't hope to understand. Marcus had been here for what felt like hours, strapped into a chair, his hands bound to cold restraints. The aliens had been kind enough to explain very little, something about testing the human species' ability to withstand extreme conditions. And that was it. No further details, no concerns for his safety. He wasn't supposed to be here. Marcus had no illusions about that. He was just a human, one of millions sent into space as part of a grand intergalactic project, a project where humans were little more than subjects for alien experimentation. No one had ever survived the tests, and Marcus knew better than to hope for anything different. His predecessors, the other humans who had been through the same procedure, were gone. There had been no survivors. But Marcus wasn't just any human. He wasn't going to just sit there and die like the others. He had trained for moments like this, moments when everything seemed stacked against him, moments where survival depended on every ounce of his willpower and skill. He had been in worse situations before, and he would be in worse situations again. This was just another test, another impossible situation that only a human could survive. The room was silent except for the low hum of the machinery. In front of him stood a large, ominous-looking console filled with lights and buttons. It pulsed with an eerie blue glow. Marcus watched as one of the alien scientists, taller than the others, with 4 arms, hovered in front of the console, his fingers moving with an almost mechanical precision, preparing the test. The countdown began. 10 minutes until activation, a robotic voice announced in a language Marcus couldn't understand. The words echoed in the chamber, deep and rhythmic. Each second felt heavier than the last. Marcus glanced around the room, trying to make sense of his surroundings. His mind raced. He was running through every possible escape, every contingency plan. The truth was, he didn't have much time. The experiment was supposed to begin soon, and Marcus had a bad feeling about this one. He knew what would happen next. It wasn't supposed to be a test anymore. It was a death sentence. The other aliens in the room continued their work, oblivious to Marcus's quiet determination. They adjusted various devices, working with their equipment as if this were just another routine test. They didn't expect him to fight back. They didn't think humans were capable of much beyond fear and submission. But that was their mistake. Marcus had always known what was coming. He had seen the records of other humans who had gone before him. They had failed because they didn't understand the true nature of the alien experiments. The aliens were studying, yes, but they weren't fully aware of the one thing that made humans unique, the ability to adapt, to think, to survive against overwhelming odds. It wasn't about physical strength. Humans weren't built for this kind of testing. No, it was their brains, their determination, and their refusal to give up that set them apart. While the aliens may have had technology that seemed unbeatable, Marcus knew the weakness was in their arrogance. They assumed the experiment would succeed because they were simply too confident in their own superiority. 5 minutes, the voice announced again, this time sharper, more urgent. The air in the room grew tense. Marcus flexed his fingers, testing the restraints. They were tight, uncomfortable, but not impossible to break. He could feel the cool metal of the chair beneath him, the weight of his body pressing into it. His heart beat steadily in his chest, each thump a reminder that he was still alive. And as long as he was alive, there was hope. He wasn't about to let these aliens take that from him. He wasn't about to let them win. In the next few minutes, things would change. Marcus had spent hours studying the layout of the lab, the patterns of the aliens' movements. He had learned to read their body language, and he could see now that they weren't as careful as they thought they were. They didn't know he had already made his move. A glimmer of hope flickered in his chest. Maybe he could survive this. Maybe he could prove them wrong. The countdown continued, and Marcus's mind focused, pushing everything else aside. There was no time for fear, no time for second thoughts. This was it. The test had begun, but Marcus was ready. He had been ready for a long time. As the seconds ticked away, one thing became clear. They had no idea what kind of force they had just unleashed. Because the experiment wasn't supposed to kill him, it was supposed to fail. And Marcus was going to make sure that's exactly what happened. Marcus took a deep breath, his chest tightening against the restraints that still held him to the chair. The air in the chamber was cold, almost suffocating, but he had learned to ignore it. His body ached, but it wasn't the physical pain that bothered him. It was the knowledge that the countdown had reached only 3 minutes. The real test was about to begin, and Marcus couldn't afford to lose focus. The aliens around him were too confident. They floated in their strange, flowing suits, speaking in their cold, mechanical language. To them, this was just another day of experimentation. But Marcus knew better. The moment they turned their backs, the moment they thought they had him under control, that's when the fight would truly begin. His eyes scanned the chamber again, quickly calculating. There were no obvious escape routes, no obvious ways out of the locked room. The walls were too smooth, and the door to the control room was tightly sealed. But what the aliens didn't realize was that they had underestimated him, and worse, they had underestimated humans. They thought the experiment was just about survival, about pushing limits. What they didn't realize was that humans had an ability they would never fully understand: resilience. It wasn't about raw power or alien technology. It was about finding a way when there seemed to be no way. And Marcus had that ability in spades. The countdown hit 2 minutes. He had already spent hours studying the layout, watching the aliens as they made adjustments to the system. Their movements were predictable, almost mechanical. They didn't think they needed to keep a close eye on him. They believed the experiment would work flawlessly, that their advanced technology would overpower him without question. Marcus knew their system inside and out. He had spent days studying the design of the machine, reading the alien texts they had left behind, and learning every possible flaw in the system. It was all about waiting for the right moment to strike. The system was complex, but there was one thing the aliens hadn't accounted for: human ingenuity. They had built the machine to test the human body's limits with high-energy reactions. But Marcus understood their biggest mistake. They had built the machine to measure physical endurance, not mental strength. The aliens had focused all their energy on the wrong part. They'd forgotten one simple thing: humans survived through their ability to adapt, to think and respond in ways machines or alien technology couldn't predict. One of the alien scientists turned to the console, a glowing green screen flashing in front of him. His hand hovered over the buttons, preparing to start the test. Marcus's breath slowed, his pulse steady despite the rising tension. The moment was near. His eyes locked onto the device connected to his wrist. It was small, almost invisible, but it was his ticket. Marcus had planted a tiny device in his sleeve before being strapped in, a small piece of technology he had built himself from parts he had secretly scavenged from his previous assignments. The device wasn't much, but it was enough to override the system just long enough to give him a fighting chance. 1 minute, the robotic voice called out, its words cutting through the stillness of the chamber. Marcus's heart rate picked up, not from fear but from anticipation. He could feel the cool metal of the restraints tightening around his wrists. The aliens were so focused on the activation sequence that they didn't notice his fingers subtly moving. His thumb brushed the tiny button hidden in his sleeve. A small green light blinked on the device, signaling that the override had worked. The system was momentarily disrupted, just enough to delay the experiment and give him the opening he needed. The alien scientist at the console looked at his screen, frowning. "There's an error. Power fluctuation detected." Marcus didn't have time to savor his success. He had a few seconds, and he knew that once the system was back online, the aliens would reconfigure the machine and start again. The pressure in the chamber was already rising, and he could feel the heat from the machine building. It wouldn't be long before the experiment was in full swing, and he would have no time to act. His hands were still bound, but the device on his wrist was now sending a steady stream of data to his brain. His fingers twitched again, and with a little force he broke the first restraint. It clicked free with a soft snap, and his arm slid out, pain shooting through the muscles. He ignored it. He couldn't stop now. Marcus quickly worked on the second restraint, all while the room's temperature began to rise, the machine humming louder. The countdown continued. 30 seconds. The aliens moved away from the console, distracted by the glitch in their system. Their attention was split, just enough for Marcus to make his move. His second restraint snapped free. The alien at the console turned back to his screen just in time to see the power surge stabilize. "Ready for activation," he said in a language Marcus couldn't understand. But it didn't matter. Marcus, now free, pushed himself out of the chair with every ounce of strength he had left. He was still weak. his muscles sore from the restraints and the limited blood flow. But his eyes locked onto the machine, and in that moment it wasn't just about survival. It was about showing them all that humanity could never be underestimated. Now, Marcus muttered to himself, pushing forward with determination. The countdown had reached 0. He was ready. This was his moment. The moment he would prove that no experiment, no matter how cruel or designed to kill, would ever defeat him. It was time to take control. The moment the countdown hit 0, the machine came to life. A surge of energy pulsed through the chamber, the air crackling with raw power. The walls trembled as lights flashed and the console hummed louder, its hum vibrating deep in Marcus's chest. Heat radiated from the central machine, as though the energy it harnessed was about to tear the very room apart. Marcus barely had time to react. The moment he stood, pain shot through his legs, his muscles burning from being bound in the restraints for so long. But there was no time to feel it. His heart hammered in his chest, but his mind stayed calm. He had prepared for this. He had to prepare for this. The chamber's temperature continued to rise, the air thickening with the electrical charge building inside the machine. A strange, sharp pain spread across Marcus's skin as the experiment began. The machine was designed to inflict the maximum amount of strain on the human body, pushing the limits of survival. It was clear now. The aliens weren't just testing his endurance, they were trying to break him. Marcus could feel the burn already starting. The electric pulses coursed through him, each one more intense than the last. Sweat dripped down his brow, and he clenched his fists against the restraints still holding his legs. His body shook from the strain, but his mind remained clear. The aliens had underestimated him. As the machine ramped up its power, Marcus's senses sharpened. His body was on fire, his muscles screaming, but he forced himself to stay focused. He had to act fast. He wasn't about to let them destroy him like they had with the others. The first step was simple. Disable the machine, at least for a few moments. If he could just get enough time to escape the center of the room, he might be able to do some real damage. With one final twist of his wrist, Marcus freed his legs from the remaining restraints. The metal clattered to the floor with a loud crash, but Marcus didn't flinch. His legs were weak, but they would hold him for now. He pushed himself forward, stumbling across the room, his body burning with each step. The aliens were still at their control panels, not paying enough attention to him. Their eyes were locked onto their instruments, the flickering screens showing data that didn't mean anything to Marcus. They were looking for results, but all they had was an underestimation of a human's determination. Marcus could barely make it across the room before another burst of energy slammed into him. It wasn't just physical anymore, it was a mental assault. His body was breaking down under the pressure. He could feel the heat searing through his veins, the electric pulses stabbing through his chest. The pain was unbearable, but it only fueled him further. The first alien scientist noticed him now. Its glowing blue eyes widened in disbelief as Marcus staggered toward the control panel. "You should not be moving," the creature hissed, its long fingers reaching for a lever. "Guess you didn't read the fine print," Marcus muttered through gritted teeth, his voice hoarse from the strain. He lunged toward the control panel, his fingers reaching for the buttons. The alien tried to stop him, but Marcus was faster. With one swift movement, he jammed his hand into the panel, activating a switch he'd spotted earlier during his study of the system. The entire room shook. A loud crack echoed through the chamber as sparks flew from the machine, the power flickering. For a brief moment, everything went dark. Marcus didn't wait to see if it was a victory. He knew the aliens would react quickly. His heart was racing, and he barely had time to catch his breath before the lights came back on. The machine had slowed its assault, but not for long. He had maybe seconds. He lunged for the nearest console, tearing through cables and pulling out the wires that connected the device to the core systems. The aliens reacted quickly, rushing toward him with speed he hadn't expected. One alien grabbed him by the arm, trying to pull him away from the controls. Marcus gritted his teeth and slammed his knee into the creature's side, sending it crashing into the wall. He wasn't going down without a fight. His vision blurred, his body screamed for him to stop, but Marcus pushed through. With another yank, the console short-circuited. The power dimmed again, and the machine sputtered, its electric hum turning to a low growl. "Stop him!" another alien shouted, its voice panicked. Marcus's chest was heaving, his breath shallow, but his focus never wavered. The aliens weren't used to being challenged like this. They had designed their system to destroy, to break anyone who dared step into their domain. But Marcus wasn't like the others. He wasn't going to be a test subject. He wasn't going to be just another failure in their cold, clinical experiment. With his last ounce of strength, Marcus tore the final cable from the system. The machine sparked violently before it collapsed, a loud, metallic groan echoing through the chamber. The lights flickered again, and the air grew still. Marcus stood there, panting, sweat dripping from his brow, and looked around the room. The alien scientists were frozen, staring at him in disbelief. He had done it. He had shut the system down, and he wasn't done yet. "Guess the experiment? Over," Marcus said, his voice steady but filled with the triumph of survival. He gave the aliens one last glance, a quiet, mocking smirk on his face. "And thank you for the hospitality." Then, without waiting for their reaction, he turned and walked toward the door, his legs weak but his resolve stronger than ever. Marcus staggered out of the ruined chamber, each step heavier than the last. His body felt like it was made of stone, his limbs aching with every movement. The electric pulses from the machine had left a burning ache deep in his bones, and he could feel the pain in his chest, the signs of damage that would take weeks to heal. But he didn't have weeks. He didn't even have hours. He had minutes. The corridor ahead was dim, lit only by flickering lights overhead. His feet dragged as he moved, his breath ragged, but his mind was clear. The moment he had broken the machine, he had known there was no going back. The aliens would come after him. They wouldn't just let him escape. They would stop at nothing to make sure he didn't leave alive. But Marcus wasn't about to let them catch him, not after everything he had been through. He pushed himself forward, his mind racing through possible escape routes. The hallway stretched ahead, but he had no idea where it led. He only knew one thing: it wasn't the way he came. The facility was silent now, an eerie quiet that made his heart race even faster. He could still hear the hum of the alien machinery behind him, a reminder that the system was failing but not yet fully shut down. He had no time to waste. His hand grazed the wall as he moved, the cool surface a slight comfort against the heat still radiating from his body. He passed multiple doors, but none of them looked familiar. He couldn't stop. He had to keep moving. He had to find a way out. As he rounded the corner, he heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps echoing in the distance. The aliens were coming. He didn't know how many, but he could hear them, moving quickly, their voices a mix of anger and confusion. They knew what had happened. They knew that Marcus had sabotaged their precious experiment. His heart pounded in his chest as he moved faster, pushing his aching body harder. He had to get out of here before they caught up to him. His hand brushed against another door. This one was different. The metal felt cold, smooth, and it was slightly ajar. Without hesitation, he pushed it open and slipped inside, closing it quietly behind him. The room was small, filled with blinking consoles and strange alien technology. It was a control room, one Marcus hadn't seen before. The door he had entered through was in the far corner, and there was a single terminal in the center of the room, surrounded by a few chairs. He could see the faint glow of data scrolling across the screen. This was it. This was his chance. Marcus limped toward the terminal, his fingers trembling as he worked his way across the controls. His mind raced as he scanned the screen. He didn't understand everything, but he had learned enough in the hours leading up to the experiment. He had studied their technology. He knew how to manipulate it, at least enough to get himself out of this mess. His fingers danced over the keys, tapping in commands he barely understood, but just enough to get results. The system responded slowly, as if it were reluctant to give in. But Marcus didn't have the luxury of time. He wasn't going to wait for the system to catch up. He needed to move now. A message flashed on the screen. Escape route unlocked. Detonation sequence initiated. Marcus's heart skipped a beat. He didn't know if the detonation was a part of their safety protocols or something more sinister, but he didn't care. All he cared about was getting out of here alive. He slammed his fist against the confirm button, and the screen flickered to life, showing a map of the facility. A red line marked the way out, leading to a distant exit. The door behind him slid open, and Marcus spun around just in time to see a group of aliens entering the room. Their glowing eyes locked onto him, their expressions a mix of surprise and fury. Marcus didn't hesitate. He darted toward the door, adrenaline pushing his exhausted body forward. The aliens moved quickly, but not quick enough. Marcus ran, his feet pounding against the metal floor as he followed the red line on the screen. He could hear them shouting behind him, but he didn't dare look back. He didn't have the luxury of slowing down now. The hallways were narrow, twisting, and unfamiliar. His body was screaming for rest, but he ignored it. Each step was a fight against exhaustion, a battle he couldn't afford to lose. He rounded a corner and skidded to a stop in front of a large, locked door. He could hear them closing in. There wasn't much time. Marcus scanned the terminal by the door, his fingers moving faster than they had ever moved before. The keys felt like they were slipping from his grasp, but he pushed through. He could hear the footsteps growing louder, the aliens closing in. And then, with a soft click, the door slid open. Without thinking, he lunged through the opening, slamming it shut behind him. He was in a new corridor, one that felt like it led outside. His chest was tight, his breathing shallow, but he didn't stop. He ran. Finally, he reached the end of the hall. The exit door loomed ahead. It wasn't locked. The aliens had clearly underestimated him. They hadn't expected him to fight back, to survive this long. He pushed through the door, stepping out into the cool, open air. He didn't look back, he couldn't. Marcus had escaped. But the real fight was just beginning. The air outside was cold and sharp, a stark contrast to the heat of the facility he had just escaped. Marcus's lungs burned as he sucked in deep breaths, trying to fill his chest with the fresh air that felt so alien after hours in the sterile confines of the lab. His legs trembled beneath him, but he couldn't stop. He had to keep moving. The door behind him slammed shut with a mechanical hiss, sealing him out from the alien-controlled base, but that didn't mean he was safe. They were coming for him. Marcus's heart raced faster as he surveyed his surroundings. He was standing on a narrow ledge of metal that jutted out from the side of the facility. Below him, an endless drop to a dark valley stretched far into the distance. Above him, the night sky was filled with distant stars, the view as beautiful as it was intimidating. But there was no time to appreciate the sight. He needed to find cover. He needed to get out of sight and fast. The first sound that reached him was the unmistakable hum of alien engines. His head snapped to the side, his heart sinking. He had no idea how many were pursuing him, but he knew it didn't matter. If the aliens wanted him dead, they wouldn't stop until he was. He turned and sprinted down the narrow metal path, his boots clanging loudly against the surface. His body screamed at him to slow down, to rest, but he couldn't. Not yet. There was no time for weakness, no time for hesitation. The hum of engines grew louder, closer. He glanced behind him to see the first of their craft coming into view, sleek, dark, and hovering effortlessly above the ground. The craft was fast, silent, and deadly. There was no way Marcus could outrun it. He needed to think. His eyes scanned the ledge, searching for anything that might give him a chance. He could jump into the valley below, but he didn't know what lay there. Death, survival, either way it was a gamble. Then something caught his eye. A series of pipes snaked along the side of the facility, disappearing into the shadows. It was a small, narrow opening, but it might be his only chance. Without hesitation, Marcus darted toward the pipes, moving quickly despite the fatigue that was beginning to drag him down. He dove beneath them, pressing his back against the cold, smooth surface of the facility. His breath was shallow, ragged, as he crouched in the shadows, hoping the craft wouldn't see him. The hum of the alien engines grew louder, and for a moment Marcus thought they would pass him by. But then, the craft slowed, hovering directly above the ledge where he had been standing just moments before. They had seen him. His pulse thudded in his ears as the alien craft began to scan the area. Lights flashed, illuminating the dark valley, casting long shadows across the landscape. It hovered in place, searching, scanning, as if it knew he was nearby but couldn't quite find him. Marcus held his breath, praying that the shadows would hide him long enough. Seconds felt like hours as the craft's searchlight passed over the ledge. For a moment, it felt like the light was going to fall directly on him. But just as it seemed like he would be discovered, the craft pulled back, its engines whining as it began to move away. Marcus exhaled, the relief flooding through him like a wave, but he didn't dare move yet, not until the sound of the craft faded completely. His heart hammered in his chest, each beat a reminder that this wasn't over. The aliens would be back. They wouldn't give up until they had him. He waited, counting the seconds in his head. When he was sure the craft was far enough away, Marcus slowly stood up, his muscles stiff from the crouch. He was exhausted, but there was no time for rest. He needed to find a way out. As he moved along the ledge, he noticed an opening in the distance, an access hatch built into the side of the facility. It was small, but it looked like it could lead him to the interior of the base. It was a long shot, but it might be the best shot he had. He took a deep breath and sprinted toward the hatch, every step a battle against his aching body. His legs felt like they were made of lead, but he couldn't stop. He couldn't let them catch him. His hand gripped the hatch handle, and he pulled it open with a quiet creak. The inside was dark, but it was better than being exposed on the ledge. Without looking back, he slipped inside and closed the hatch behind him. The air inside was stale and cold. He had no idea where he was, but it didn't matter. All he cared about was getting further away from the aliens, further away from the death they had planned for him. For a moment, Marcus allowed himself to close his eyes, taking a deep, steadying breath. He wasn't safe yet, but he was alive, and that was all that mattered. The sound of distant footsteps echoed down the hall, and Marcus tensed. They were searching for him already. His time was running out. But this time, Marcus had the advantage. He wasn't going to wait for them to come to him. He was going to take control. He was going to find a way out of here, and he would make them regret ever thinking they could control him. With a fierce, determined look in his eyes, Marcus moved forward. The fight wasn't over. The hallway was narrow, the walls lined with unfamiliar technology. The air smelled stale, and Marcus could feel the weight of silence pressing in on him. He had barely escaped the aliens' search, but there was no time to rest. He couldn't afford to. The longer he stayed in this base, the closer they would get to finding him, and if they did, he wouldn't get another chance. His heart pounded in his chest as he moved down the hallway, every sound amplified in the stillness of the complex. The metal floors beneath him were cold, and his every step felt like a reminder of how far from safety he truly was. But the drive to survive, to outsmart them, pushed him forward. The pain from the earlier experiment still burned in his muscles, but Marcus ignored it. He couldn't let it stop him, not now. His mind raced as he moved through the hallways. The alien technology around him seemed to pulse with life, their screens flashing numbers and symbols he couldn't understand. But he didn't need to. He had studied their systems long enough to know one thing: they were overconfident. They believed they had the upper hand, that the experiment was already a success. They hadn't anticipated someone like Marcus, someone who would fight for every last breath. He came to a junction in the hallway, and for a moment he stopped. There were two ways forward. One led deeper into the facility, probably to a command center or the core systems, while the other led outside, toward what looked like a set of transport pods. Marcus weighed his options quickly. The command center might have more answers, but the pods, those were his escape. He didn't hesitate. Marcus took the left path, moving quickly and silently. The hallway curved and stretched, the hum of alien machinery growing louder as he neared his destination. He kept to the shadows, staying low, avoiding the occasional patrols of aliens moving through the halls. His breath was steady, his mind focused. Every step brought him closer to freedom. But as he rounded a corner, he froze. A group of aliens stood ahead, blocking his path. Their sleek, silvery forms stood still, watching the corridor. Their sharp eyes gleamed in the dim light, and Marcus knew they were searching for him. The sound of their boots clicking against the floor echoed down the hall as they advanced, unaware that he was nearby. Marcus's pulse quickened. He had no time to turn back. There was only one thing to do. Without a second thought, he reached into his utility belt and pulled out a small grenade, one of the makeshift devices he had rigged together with his limited resources. It wasn't much, but it would buy him time. His heart raced as he primed the grenade, tossing it down the hallway with a swift motion. The aliens' eyes widened as they saw it, but it was too late. The small device detonated with a deafening explosion, sending a wave of heat and noise rippling down the corridor. The aliens were thrown off balance, their bodies tossed back by the force. Marcus didn't wait to see the fallout. He sprinted past them, moving fast, his legs pushing him harder than they had ever gone. The explosions had created chaos, but he couldn't waste it. He had one shot at this, and he wasn't going to let it slip away. He ran through the smoke and debris, his breath coming in sharp gasps. The hallway ahead was clearer now. He saw the transport pods in the distance, their sleek metallic surfaces shining in the low light. His eyes locked onto them, and for the first time he felt the glimmer of hope he had been searching for. But just as he was about to reach the pods, a shrill alarm blared to life. The entire facility was on high alert. Intruder detected, lockdown initiated. The robotic voice echoed over the intercom, sending a shiver down Marcus's spine. Panic surged through him, but he didn't slow down. The lockdown might be coming, but he was closer than ever. He could see the pods, their doors just ahead. The aliens would be on him in moments, but he had a plan. As he reached the pod entrance, he slammed his hand against the control panel. It flickered for a moment, then the door hissed open, revealing the empty cockpit inside. Marcus didn't hesitate. He leaped inside, his fingers flying over the controls. His mind was a blur of calculations, trying to make sense of the unfamiliar system. The facility's alarms were still blaring, and he could hear the heavy footsteps of the aliens approaching. But Marcus was fast. He had no choice but to be. With one last push, he activated the pod's engines. The engines hummed to life, and the pod's massive doors began to close, sealing Marcus inside. He glanced up at the viewport just in time to see the approaching figures of the aliens, their weapons drawn. They were too late. The pod shot forward, blasting through the opening doors of the facility, tearing into the dark sky beyond. The stars stretched out before him, infinite and endless. As the pod soared into the night, Marcus leaned back in his seat, his body exhausted but his spirit stronger than ever. He had done it. He had escaped. The aliens would not stop hunting him. He knew that. They would come after him, but Marcus wasn't afraid. He had survived their experiment, outsmarted their technology, and escaped their clutches. He had proven something to himself and to the entire galaxy. No one, not even the most powerful beings in the universe, could control him. This was just the beginning. The pod was a small, humming vessel that cut through the stars at a blistering pace. Marcus gripped the controls with both hands, his knuckles white, his mind racing. The escape from the facility had been swift, but he knew it wasn't over. The aliens would come after him, and they wouldn't stop. They didn't understand what he was capable of, what humanity was capable of. Marcus glanced out the viewport. The vastness of space stretched before him, endless and dark. For a moment, he allowed himself to breathe, letting the cool air of the pod's cabin fill his lungs. He was free. He had done it. But the weight of the mission still pressed heavily on him. The aliens had underestimated him, his ability to fight back, to adapt, to survive. And that's what he had done. He had fought and won, but this wasn't just about surviving. This was about something bigger. He had to warn the others. His mind flashed back to the alien facility, to the pain, to the terror of the experiment. He could still feel the searing burn of the machine's energy coursing through him, the shock waves of destruction as he sabotaged their system. They had pushed him to the edge, but he had fought back with everything he had. And now, as the stars passed in a blur, he knew it wasn't just about him. It was about every human who had been sent to those experiments, every human who had been used and discarded. They couldn't be allowed to keep doing this. He set his jaw, fingers flying over the pod's controls as he plotted a course for Earth. The journey would be long, but he couldn't waste any more time. Every moment was a step toward victory, and he wasn't about to waste it. He was ready for whatever came next. Suddenly, the pod's alarms blared, the shrill sound breaking through the quiet of space. Marcus's heart jumped into his throat as the warning lights flickered red. He checked the sensors. A ship, no, several ships were closing in fast. The aliens had found him. His pulse quickened. He wasn't ready for this, not like this. He wasn't fully recovered, and his pod wasn't built for a fight, but there was no choice now. He wasn't going to run, not anymore. Marcus's mind raced as he flicked switches and adjusted the pod's settings. He knew they were coming for him, and they weren't going to let him leave easily. He didn't have weapons, but he had something better. He had his wits, and he had the fire of survival in his chest. The enemy ships came into view, sleek and deadly, their engines roaring as they approached. There were at least 3 of them, each equipped with enough firepower to destroy a small fleet. But Marcus didn't flinch. He knew they couldn't get to him, not if he could outmaneuver them. He slammed his foot on the pedal, sending the pod into a sharp turn. The sudden movement jolted him in his seat, and for a moment he felt the pull of the gravity that the pod's artificial systems struggled to maintain. His fingers gripped the controls tightly as the ships closed in. The aliens opened fire. The pod's weapon systems flashed, and the energy blasts lit up the vast emptiness around him, streaking through space like lightning. Marcus ducked, instinctively pulling the pod into a corkscrew motion, twisting and spinning to avoid the blasts. The ship behind him was gaining fast, but Marcus wasn't ready to give up. He had learned their tactics, learned them from studying everything they did in the facility. He knew how they fought. He knew how they would try to predict his moves. And he had one thing they didn't: the human ability to think outside the box. With a sudden move, Marcus hit a series of buttons, redirecting the power from the pod's shield to its engines. The pod surged forward, its engines roaring to life with a speed the alien ships couldn't match. Marcus's hands flew across the controls, carefully guiding the pod toward a nearby asteroid field. The sudden shift in direction threw the alien ships off balance. As the pod entered the asteroid field, Marcus's breath caught in his chest. The asteroids were large and scattered, but they offered a path of cover. The aliens would be forced to slow down if they wanted to avoid collisions. But Marcus didn't have the luxury of time. He had to find a way to take them out, or they'd catch up again. The first enemy ship hesitated as it entered the asteroid field, trying to avoid the floating debris. Marcus took a deep breath, knowing this was his moment. He quickly calculated the distance between him and the asteroid nearest to him, judging the size and speed. Then, with perfect timing, he pulled the pod into a sharp turn, using the asteroid as cover to hide from their sensors. His heart raced as he steadied the pod. The alien ships couldn't see him now, but they were persistent, and Marcus knew they would regroup and try to find him. He had to act quickly. He checked the controls one last time. There was no turning back now. Marcus hit the emergency override and armed the pod's backup weapon systems. A simple EMP, enough to disable the ship's systems temporarily. It wasn't perfect, but it would give him the chance he needed to escape. With a deep breath, he fired. A flash of bright blue light erupted from the pod, shooting out toward the alien ships. The blast hit, and for a moment the entire area was bathed in a burst of light. The ship's engines sputtered, their systems going offline as the EMP took effect. Marcus grinned, his hands still steady on the controls. The alien ships were now useless. They would drift helplessly in space until their systems rebooted, and by then he would be far, far away. He wasn't done yet. He wasn't going to stop fighting until the job was done, until every last alien who had ever underestimated humanity learned the same lesson. The battle wasn't over, but today he had won.